Welcome to Redesigning Cities, the Speedwell Foundation talks at Georgia Tech. This is episode 47. I'm your host, Ellen Dunham Jones, a professor in the School of Architecture, where I direct the Master of Science in Urban Design. Now, before we get started, I also want to encourage you to save the date on Halloween for the next episode on impactful mayors. We will have Mayor Mick Cornett and noted urban designer Jeff Speck talking about their extremely successful implementation of they have revived downtown Oklahoma City by making every street on the 50 block area more walkable, more comfortable, and really revive that city. So today, our topic is planning cities for autonomous shuttle buses, or AV shuttles, or SAVs, shared AVs. There's like several acronyms. We all know, that autonomous vehicles are already here. Private AVs like Tesla are easy to spot. Atlanta is full of privately owned and operated robotaxis like Waymo, and several other cities are. But today, our speakers will make the case that AV shuttle buses provide more benefits to cities. Jun Wang, assistant professor at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, will share her dissertation research on planning for AV shuttles. And then Mark Wigder, Boca Rotan Council Member, will tell us why he championed on-demand AV shuttle service in his city and how it's doing so far. So start with a little introduction. Mark Wigder brings his expertise in infusing sustainability into real estate portfolios and his passion for affordable housing and multi-use trails into his role as Boca Raton Council Member. After taking all of the sustainability courses offered during his Yale Executive MBA, he founded the Greenhouse Property Company and co-founded Greensmith Builders, LLC, a builder of net zero multifamily and workforce housing communities, including Prairie Lofts, winner of the Best SIP Sustainable Project. We need more people like this on city councils. Thank you, Mark. He's been active in many charities and community boards, including the Boca Raton Bicycle and Pedestrian Board, and as council member, in addition to championing the city's adoption of AV shuttle service, he chairs the Community Redevelopment Agency and the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Jun Wang is a Georgia Tech School of Architecture PhD and MS Urban Design alumna and an assistant professor now in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Florida Atlantic University. I'm proud to say that I was her dissertation advisor, along with Gulsa Akar. Jun's research sits at the intersection of urban design and transportation planning with a focus on shared autonomous mobility, multimodal access, and evidence-based suburban retrofits. She applies spatial analysis and machine learning to large-scale mobility and built environment data to inform equitable car-light community design. Dr. Wang is an advocate for partnership with local governments, nonprofits, and neighborhood groups to co-produce walkable, transit-oriented design strategies through workshops, charrettes, and public lectures, translating research into tangible improvements for communities. So, Jun, I'm going to stop sharing, and please share your slides and help us understand what AV shuttle-based urbanism might look like. Then we'll go to Mark to see how they're actually being deployed in Boca Raton.
Okay, good noon, everyone online. So glad to be here, share my studies and some of the insights on how we can step into a shared future of autonomous urbanism. as autonomous vehicle move from pilots to service, as Ellen just mentioned, we can either amplify the old mistakes we already made in the past century or use automation to correct them. The slide you're seeing right now, pathway to a shared future, is the decision point. So I want everyone to remember that the image here is last week I asked ChatGPT to generate a walkable community with shared autonomous vehicles, and this is how it looks like. At the end, we'll relook at this timeline and you'll know why. So before we actually get the full discussion of autonomous vehicles whatsoever, I want to clarify some of the levels of driving automation. This is designed and published by Society of Automotive Engineers, which is probably one of the most widely accepted and used both in the industry and academia about the level of driving automation. Below SAE level 2, that would be the more conventional non-automation or very low automation that you would see in the car you're probably driving right now, often identified as the ADAS, the Advanced Driving Assistance System. That would be the below level 2 or level 2. Above level 3, that would be the more common. We're getting into the autonomous driving territory. Level 3 used to be how Tesla claimed their autonomous driving service to be. And level 4 and 5 is really what we're talking about in the slides and today's discussion, that no human intervention is required in most of the scenarios. And level 5, there's no human intervention at all. To a shared future. Why? Why I want a pathway lead us to the shared future of autonomous vehicles with our cities. Private autonomous vehicles extend the acceptable commute radius. So imagine if your car can drive itself, the friction of time in traffic decreases, and the distance you are willing to live from work, school, or healthcare will expand. That is not a hypothetical issue. If we look back into the history, it's just a land use response to generalized travel costs. Second, we risk what Mabel in her book that defined as autonomous sprawl. It's not just an outward growth in one direction or the old automotive metropolis we've already seen in many, many years. It's a multi-directional optimistic dispersion. Instead of coherent centers connected by transit, we get dispersed pods stitched together by autonomous vehicle optimized arterials. There's no space left for pedestrians and other micro-transit or mobilities. The figure on the slide shows exactly that scenario from Mabel's book. A metastasizing pattern around a blue core, followed by new smart corridors. If we wait to respond until aftermarket signals harden into subdivisions and highway funds, we will be stuck with that geometry again for another decade. So the timing matters. Prepare before it's too late. Heaven or hell, which kind of future we want to live in? And the alternative I present today is the shared autonomous vehicle, the shared autonomy of the cars as an urban design and the governance framework. Shared autonomous vehicle mobilities can support a compact, mixed-use suburban pattern if and only if we align the street, the curb, and the code all together. Shared autonomous urbanism is the three things at once, in my opinion, which is the mobility architecture and physical design of the streets and nodes that prioritize walking, biking, and boarding, and the policy guardrails that use pricing, zoning, and procurement that prevent the private autonomous vehicle ownership from subsidizing longer commutes. And to support such a pathway, we need the three pillars, also the three core thesis of my research, which is the urban design, transportation, and sustainability. At the center of the interaction of them three will be a car-free urbanism that will lead us to a more resilient everyday life environment. Technology alone won't carry us there. We need the three pillars together, aligning to incentivize compact developments. And the data generated through the practices of autonomous vehicles and those mobilities should be used back to enforce and give inspirations and insights to the design of the physical environment. That's some bigger ideas. Right now, if we're talking about the autonomous vehicle practices in the US, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, they have an initiative called AV Test. They require all the AV practices that partnered with a public department or public sector should report their practice into their system. And so far, we see 194 practice projects in there, both the piloting ones or the educational practices. Coming into the first place, it's not California, it's actually Florida, having most of the reports and partnership with public sector in terms of autonomous vehicles in the system, and California and Texas coming really close in the second and third place. And the top company to this kind of operation and partnership with the public sector is Beep. It's a commercial company providing operation and services of autonomous vehicles. And the most common street types of those practices is actually streets, which exactly what I want to see. I want to see how that everyday life happening on the streets, it can be integrated together with autonomous vehicle practices. And the vehicle type that's most common right now is shuttle. And the second one is the regular cars and the mixed fleets. So that's what we are doing in this country right now with the private and public partnership in terms of the piloting and practice about autonomous vehicles and shared autonomous vehicles. But I will also share some insights from my own research based on data and survey we gathered throughout the years. So first one, we want to understand who are the early potential adopters or users for different AV mobilities, especially shared autonomous vehicle mobilities. And for this one, very interestingly, we found that households, the families with kids younger than 5 years old, they show a much higher willingness level to use driverless robotaxis or shared autonomous vehicles in general. And minorities, they have higher willingness than the other group to be interested in using a driverless robotaxi. And they have actually shows higher willingness to no driver at all shared autonomous vehicles compared to the with a backup driver or operator option. But one thing we show that we see from this survey data gathered from Seattle metropolitan region is definitely there's a general decrease of willingness and acceptance to AV technology in general from 2017 to 2019. I think that's partially because of the tragic happened in 2018, the first pedestrian fatality caused by a robotaxi. And that's about the interaction with people. What about with the built environment? What's the relationship of autonomous vehicle with built environment? We found that sidewalk density and the bike lane density emerged to be a significant factor in different type of affecting different type of autonomous vehicle mobilities. And the average setback is the little gap, the distance in between the boundary of the parcel line and the boundary of the allowed construction line. So the average setback in the neighborhoods negatively correlated with the willingness to adopt commuting alone in AV or owning a private autonomous vehicle, suggesting that people who reside in areas with larger setbacks, mostly suburban areas with much lower density, are less open to AV technology in both private partnership and being part of the transit system. And through our simulation and modeling, one thing we found that the advanced dedicated infrastructure built for autonomous vehicles can actually benefit the adoption and expansion of autonomous vehicle market in general at an early stage. But once the market penetration rate of AV surpasses 65%, this kind of benefit of improving network efficiency no longer exists. So we should be very cautious about putting in the upfront investment and dedicated infrastructure that only prioritize autonomous vehicles in any kind. And for sure, safety. I think that probably is one of the biggest topic or concerns among the public regarding AV technology in general. Through the crush data regarding autonomous driving system, ADS, and advanced driving assistance system, ADAS, that gathered by National Highway Traffic Safety Administration from 2021 to April 2025. Through the causal analysis, we found that ADS can have better safety performance than the traditional ADAS system, but not always the case. It's only when it's in a higher speed and front impact crush scenarios, ADAS can yield bigger safety improvement than the traditional ADAS system. And ADAS perform better at unusual roadway conditions, but mostly under daylights. So the safety, we still need a lot of practice and observations to understand, is it actually safer than the traditional cars? But we clearly already see that is not always the case. So after all the insights we've gained from the practice and from the surveys and data and simulation, at the end of the day, as I said, data should be used for the design. It should be used to improve the everyday life of everyone, all the residents. So we want to propose a car light or car-free every neighborhood model and a regional plan for the suburban towns. In this one, we want to use different scales of autonomous vehicles and different autonomous vehicle mobilities for different level of service of the street. And together at different streets, with those mobility services, different land use patterns and combinations will be aligned on both sides of the street and roads to support different densities and different housing demand for different type of people and population. Everyone will have the variety of housing and mobility options in such neighborhoods. And at a regional level, we wish that the autonomous vehicle mobilities can support a regional network that really connecting those neighborhoods and dots together to be a robust system. And to really reduce people's expense on the transportation and housing eventually. And you can see that once we apply this theoretical model to the real world, how the different type of streets and different type of AV mobility services are aligned with the housing and the built environment design. And this really gives us a chance to reform and reinvent our intersections and just everyday normal objects you will see on the street, and give us a chance to improve the safety and livability of the communities. And beyond the academia, in the industry, there are a lot of companies trying to not only just developing the technologies of the manufacturing the car or the algorithm, they are also trying to explore how the vehicle product and AV technology can be an organic part of the city, of the environment, of the everyday living life. So Toyota, using their own AV models, the shared AV models, e-pallet, they used a piece of land their own. They started this initiative and construction called Woven City. They resumed the construction in 2025, really wanted to be a living laboratory, human-centered, and ever-evolving city that not only they can test their autonomous vehicles in, but to be a place to showcase and explore the ways of co-living with shared autonomous vehicles for everyday demands. The transportation system in Woven City is separated into two parts. One is on the ground, one is underground. The underground mainly is dedicated for testing and experiment, but the on-ground one, they separate the road system into three levels. One is exclusively for pedestrians, one is shared by pedestrian and personal mobility, and one is dedicated to the shared autonomous vehicles. And the smart traffic signal and multifunctional pools are also being integrated into this whole system in the hope to improve the safety and the efficiency of it. But there are major challenges remain for the expansion and just the mass adoption of autonomous vehicles in general. My biggest four concerns, definitely the first one is shifted workforce demand. How we're going to help all those taxi drivers and bus drivers and so many people working in this whole transportation transit industry to find their place once we just massively adopt autonomous driving systems. And the second is a public trust in AV technology. I truly feel that once the fatality happened, the first one ever happened in 2018, after that, the general public's trust in this technology never really recovered 100%. So how can we regain the trust and build more? That will be another issue. And the legal liability and definitely the very difficult moral decisions under a fully autonomous scenario, like the classic trolley problem, that will be a much bigger and deeper issue that we need to figure out. But I do have a vision for the pathways to the shared autonomous vehicle urbanism future. The first one, start small. Pick one corridor. Start with it as an anchor destination. And second, familiarize the residents with this technology. Build some mobility hubs that shared autonomous vehicles can use it, and then slowly pilot neighborhood shuttles with autonomous vehicle technology so the resident can be more familiarized and have some basis for trust in them with this technology in general. And third, integrate AV technology to the existing system. Layer in autonomy where it helps headways, not as just a sideshow. Start with low-speed segments, keep a safety stored. And fourth, connect the dots and reform the parkings. Tie the public and private investment to service the permanence of shared autonomous vehicles. And last but not least, scale laterally, connect to a second corridor and make the network, make a really robust system. So this is a picture. Now we call back to the first picture generated by ChatGPT. This one also generated by ChatGPT with almost identical command I gave it, but this one was generated in January. You can see how much improvement and progress even AI model had in just 8 months. So is it really improving or just happen to eat more works from the scholars and researchers? I don't know, but I hope we're on the right track to the shared future of full automation of our cars. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jun. So you've given us some of the hypothetical, some of the very detailed survey research, and performance research. Let's hear now from Mark so Mark, how did Boca Raton decide to go this way? Tell us about the AV shuttle system and how it evolved in Boca Raton.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Jun. That was a great overview, and it really was a really great segue of turning research, significant research, into actual practice, because I do feel that the city kind of evolved in many ways as you just described. Again, Boca Raton is a suburb of Miami, about an hour away, about 50 miles away. So started as a small suburb exactly 100 years ago. So right, the automobile was just getting started, and obviously there was just some major streets and Model Ts and all those things. And really, after World War II, with the advent of the interstate highway, the Eisenhower Act, really it got more connected with large arterial roads, but still suburban, right? So still sprawl. So to Jun's point on one of the slides, I think it was slide 3 or something like that, in terms of adoption, right? So you have still significant suburban sprawl where adoption would be a barrier, right? Because the idea is, well, you have this vehicle, but I need to be in control of the vehicle. I can't wait for it to come because it's too sprawled out and all those things. And so then as the cities start to grow and get urbanized, then you have the introduction of mass transit. And again, in South Florida, which might be different from, let's say, New York, you have still significant sprawl. So even the bus lines and the rail transit of Tri-Rail are still limited in their access, where you have to get to those things, right? But then eventually, what started to happen, let's say, in the last 25 years, really after the turn of the century, is then you started to have downtowns, quote, the word downtowns in terms of a kind of more dense urban core, start to form in cities in South Florida, outside of Miami, including Boca Raton, Delray Beach, West Palm Beach, where we really started to have some kind of downtown urbanism, some more taller buildings where you could mix the uses, create more walkable environments, create more mass transit opportunities. And I think once you had that dense urban core, where people would want to embrace new technologies and mass transit services, and kind of evolve, as Jun said, to the car light neighborhood. Once the neighborhood has evolved to be kind of accepting, or prepared to accept the car light neighborhood, then we started to see that, first we had our own shuttle system go into play, in our downtown and in certain sectors of the city. Recently, a couple of years ago, we started our own on-demand service. Right? There's Freebie, there's Circuit. We use Circuit, and we call it Connect, where there's an on-demand service that also started in an urban core, and then, as Jun mentioned in one of her slides, the donut of the proximity to the urban core. So the on-demand shuttle was there. The key to the on-demand shuttle working with our work with those vendors was that the waiting time of a client should not be more than 10 minutes. Once the waiting time is beyond 10 minutes for any shuttle, whether it's autonomous or manned, then it becomes, right, then I should just get in my car and do what I have to do, right? So once we said, hey, you have enough dense urban core and enough, and enough funds to start a on-demand shuttle less than 10 minutes, then the acceptance rate goes up dramatically, which is what we've seen. And then likewise, with technology increases and on-demand shuttles now turning into autonomous vehicles, we're starting to see that shift also, where we can not only have an on-demand shuttle, now we can have the on-demand shuttle be autonomous. And obviously Waymo is, let's say, one of the leaders in that. In Boca Raton, we're using a newer company that's headquartered in Boca Raton called Guidant. And what we've come to find is that so they're on their pilot program now, which is in one sector of the urban core. And then they have a 3-phase rollout, which will literally start, in, let's call it, concentric circles, starting with one smaller circle, which is very easy for manage and to get data. There is a National Transportation Safety Association approval and various approvals associated with the implementation locally in our jurisdiction. So first, the company is required to do the pilot program, which is starting right now, and it's doing already in West Palm Beach. And then it can roll out the phase 2 and the phase 3. And what we're seeing so far in the other pilot programs that are done with our company is that the autonomous shuttle, as Jun said, there's adoption, but really what we're seeing is an increase in safety, because the data that the autonomous vehicles are providing, remember, you basically have rolling sensors, and it's not just one sensor. They're telling me they have 70 sensors all over the vehicle. And initially, if a bird flies by the car, it'll stop suddenly, or it'll slow down too fast if a tree waves too close, if there's a small branch, because it has to get used to those things. The AI has to learn, all those things. So it is, there is a learning process associated with it. But it was, anecdotally, what the owner was telling me is that, in some of the first iterations of the pilot program, when it started to go and started to see all the sensors started to come to life, and it started reporting. Once the autonomous vehicle started reporting what's happening around its vehicle, it's not just that it's using its sensors to monitor its own progress. It's monitoring everything around itself. So unfortunately, it found in its 0.9 loop that it did, I think the first one was in West Palm Beach, in the 0.9 mile loop that it did, of course, it obeys every traffic signal, It obeys every stop sign. It obeys every rule of the road. It found dozens of other vehicles violating general traffic laws, cutting people off, turning without a signal, not stopping, right? So it observed all those things happening because that's how people operate, right? There's a layer of acceptance and there's a layer of non-compliance that's just built into how humans manage their vehicles. And so it really became this kind of eye-opening thing where, where the guidance was then, the vehicle was then noticing really like traffic hazards and pointing out to the city officials, oh, this bush is too high because it's on a corner and it's not letting my AV sensor see around to see where I'm supposed to turn. This owner should cut their bush down, right? So the level of data that is leading, that humans just normally just deal with it, right? Oh, that bush is too high. I'll stick my head out, or I'll just take a risk and I'll, do that. The autonomous vehicle doesn't have those those decision tree matrices where it's just gonna, just avoid, just to forget about, or just, not consider the data. It will report all the data it receives. And so I think, as this data starts to grow, people will start to realize that the autonomous vehicle has an opportunity to be much, much safer than traditional driving, but it will also make traditional driving much, much safer because it might report, and it will begin to report, data on its route-based environment or wherever it's going, much more much more structured and much more research-based than humans, which, are saying, hey, like we'll get calls on a city council basis, we'll get calls that say, oh yeah, someone should do something about this pothole or this road, or there's their tree that's hanging over the road. Like you'll get the ones that are really kind of in your face, or that are really, might be a very dangerous hazard condition. But the kind of normal course of things that people have just gotten accustomed to, like the bush that might need to be a little more trimmed down, so you can see, you can see your turning radius a little bit better. The autonomous vehicle might be that true, fresh set of eyes that we're, that we, in many respects, take for granted. And it's exciting to see that this is happening, and that it itself is going to evolve. And I think it's going to evolve in a very positive way, as it continues to learn, really.
Oh, thank you, Mark. It is really interesting to hear all this. Now, tell us a little about, why the interest. I know you've said that part of what also really interests you, it evolved naturally because you had some of these companies based in Boca Raton, but it was also out of a concern for the affordable housing. So talk about the affordability issues in terms of your interest in the shuttle views.
Yeah, we really looking at housing challenges in South Florida. I mean, obviously it's a national challenge for affordable housing, but when we really started to dig into this, and I've been on, as and as you said in the beginning, I've been on the Affordable Housing Committee, and I go to the county's Affordable Housing Committee and really start to analyze these issues. And what you really come to realize is that in terms of affordable housing, you're really not looking just at affordable housing. You're really looking at the affordability of the workforce to live and work. And in order for the affordability of the workforce to be, sustainable, you have to include the transit component, right? So if I give a workforce, presume they're a police officer or a fireman or a teacher, if I give them an affordable apartment that's, let's say, $1,500 a month, which would normally be $3,000 a month Yes, that apartment is affordable. But if I move that affordable apartment 30 or 40 miles outside the city center where those people are working, how much have I really saved their, their affordability? How much have I affected, their lifestyle because they have to commute an hour and a half to work? They have to pay for a car. They have to pay for insurance. They have to pay for the gas. They have to pay for that travel, the time, the stress on their own personal life, their personal systems. So we really start looking at affordability. We're starting to look at it new. Instead of just the cost of housing, it's the cost of living. And the cost of living includes getting to and from your work to your house. So again, the best option would be, of course, to create, mixed use districts where you can live, work, and play and learn in those same districts. So you don't need to travel so much internally, right? Traditional urban cores have that. In other locations where you have suburban sprawl, like we do here, you don't have a lot of that. And you certainly don't have a lot of that opportunity. And you certainly don't have a lot of that opportunity to do so quickly. It has to, in a certain respect, happen organically. Why? Because you have, of 17,000 acres of the city of Boca Raton, 75% of it is suburban single family zoning. You cannot simply just change that zoning overnight. It takes decades, if not generations, to really have that evolve into urban cores as it has been doing. So the next best way to do it is to say, hey, okay, we need to start getting the cost component, the travel component. If we can make the travel component for our workforce to be more affordable, that plays into the affordability of life, component, that Venn diagram where we were saying, hey, we're going to get the workforce to their locations faster and to home faster, and autonomous vehicles can potentially solve that, right? Where it starts right now with on-demand shuttles, but then it could eventually get into autonomous vehicles. We're saying, hey, it's going to be more affordable for them to get to work, get home. So it's going to be overall cheaper for them to live. So looking at overall household expense must include the transit component and the potential cost reductions of autonomous vehicles certainly have this amazing opportunity to be a major part of that. So again, could be it's going to be some time to get it out and to adopt it and to get all the bugs worked out, let's say, but certainly it's going to be a very important part of that kind of cost reduction for overall household affordability that we're trying to consider on a holistic level.
So, I want to dig a little bit more into the cost issues, and I'm delighted to see that Peter Calthorpe, noted urban designer, planner, coined the term transit-oriented development, very schooled on these issues, has raised his hand. And Peter, I'll get back to you, but first, Mark, we know that as a rule of thumb, 50% of the operating cost of a regular bus is the salary for the driver. And of course, if you're paying a driver, you want the biggest bus possible. So you end up with, the big bus that comes once an hour to low density areas, and you don't end up with a whole lot of drivers. AV shuttles promise to be a much cheaper service to operate because you presumably won't need the driver. But are you finding that to be true?
Well, in the early adoption stages, I think there is as I say, a trust but verify kind of standard where you have enhanced human interaction. In our first, in the first pilot program that's coming out, and that went into place in West Palm Beach, next door. There was a human driver just standing by in the car, standing by to take over if necessary. What I thought was remarkable, there are some autonomous vehicles that have an actual steering wheel. The Guidant and some of the other ones, they're true shuttles. They do not have a steering wheel. They're operated completely remotely. For our autonomous vehicle, yes, there is a driver that will be there, but there will be no steering wheel. The driver in the car will have their own joystick, per se, like a PlayStation, but a vehicular joystick where they will be, essentially linking back to the central hub, in the headquarters and driving the vehicle in that way, still remotely, but they will be sitting in the car, so they will be visually observing, their surroundings. So I think there's going to be an adaptation curve with the cost, and then eventually, as that system becomes trusted and verified, and approved from a regulatory environment, which is my understanding of how it has to proceed, then those cost savings opportunities will start to build up as the one person or who is remote in the headquarters will then be able to manage more traveling autonomous vehicles, more like, I guess what's been conveyed to me, more as an air traffic controlling, right? More as like the air traffic controller who's monitoring all the planes that are moving around, that they'll be able to do so and be able to, remote in if they need to any single vehicle at that time. And the headquarters, if you go to the headquarters of the Guidon in Boca Raton, it in fact looks like that they have they have the screens, 100 screens of every car that's out there, and then they have a steering wheel, then they have a driving kind of simulator that's set up that if that the technician could literally just take over any car and just start driving it with a massive wide wraparound screen, as any person would driving would have, so they could just drive it from right there. So I think once that happens, once you start reducing the labor cost as adaptation and trust, become more ingrained, then I do see that there's going to be some huge opportunities for cost savings. The other thing about buses and what I've learned as city official approving budgets and things like that, like the labor cost, yes, is 50%, but just the operating cost is a lot, right? The fuel cost is a lot. Even those hybrid buses, the tire costs are a lot. They tell me stories, a lot in the summertime in Florida. It's super, super hot. Those buses are super, super heavy, and they're changing tires more often than you and I change our traditional vehicle, right? So there's an operational cost that just gets higher with bigger vehicles, in addition to the labor costs. So I think there could be, kind of like a gross cost savings, in addition to just the labor as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mark on that part that we still need more big and long enough SAV just service out there to actually know will the cost be lower or higher. It might be higher at the end, but there's also other social gains that's external benefits out of the technology or service itself. And another layer, my concern about just get rid of the driver, there's no driver at all. There's another layer of bus drivers' responsibility is to be responsive to the emergency happened on the vehicle. So how are we going to deal with that on the autonomous shuttles? That another
public safety, right?
Yeah.
The bus driver acts in many respects as a public safety officer. They can call 911, they can call dispatch, they can call these things. Can the sensors of the internal vehicle, whether they're vehicular cameras or whatnot, can they, will they have that same level of human interaction or even human intuition, where the bus driver knows something is wrong, maybe someone is having a medical emergency, right? And they could turn around and know that they have to call dispatch or 911 right away because this person is having a heart attack, God forbid, or something like that. Will the autonomous vehicle be able to take over that? To take over that portion, again, which might be infrequent, but to your point, Jun, which that emergency thing of, that the driving portion, right? And the actual dealing with, the humans in the vehicle, not just the sensors outside, but the sensors inside. So I think there's a big learning curve there too that could take some time.
But I think also to Jun's earlier point, I mean, the learning curve of these vehicles and the software and algorithms. It's rapidly increasing. And on demand has been a real game changer, kind of pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. So on demand has obvious benefits for users, but I'd like to kind of shift the conversation a bit and then bring Peter in at some point. What does it mean for real estate values? Does it now mean that the whole city becomes a TOD, a transit-oriented development, when everybody can actually call transit and have it arrive hopefully within 10 minutes? Does that begin to eliminate the bump that housing always goes up, the cost of housing that's in proximity to transit? Does it kind of help even things out? And so I'd like to, shall I, maybe Peter probably has his own question, but I'm going to go ahead and see if we can bring Peter in.
Obviously, I've been really interested in everything you guys are talking about because I've been advocating for the right kind of use of autonomous vehicles. I think there is a wrong kind of use, and you've focused a lot on the wrong type of use. Mm-hmm. So an autonomous vehicle, taxi, van, shuttle, whatever you want to call it, that goes anywhere and picks up anybody, will generate massive additional VMT. So one metric that I didn't hear discussed very much was VMT. Now, with VMT comes cost, obviously, and environmental consequences, but also congestion. The numbers that and I'm not a scientist who stays up to speed with the latest studies, so I may be working off of old numbers, but a single occupant autonomous taxi, because of deadheads, which is circling and going to remote locations to pick people up, and then being stranded out in that remote location and having to reposition to get to the next viable trip, and 50 to 90% more VMT.
But we're not talking about the robotaxis.
Well, you are, because these vans are basically that. They're on call, and they will go pick you up if you say, I need a ride from A to B. So they are largely equivalent. Now, maybe what you're alluding to is that somebody else could, hitch a ride and get in the van as well. So their data on that, shared taxis, it's called, is 30 to 60% increase in VMT. Privately owned autonomous vehicles, around 35% additional VMT. And that's because of, it induces sprawl, and longer trips become easier to handle, and therefore people, spend more time on the road. Okay, so massive increases in VMT in any scenario of autonomy, other than using it as a true transit line on a dedicated right-of-way. So the thing that I've been advocating and been very interested in looking at, because it has a lot of benefits, is you have routes and you have dedicated right-of-ways and you have stations, but instead of buses, otherwise known as BRT, right? But instead of buses, you have these autonomous vans, and they move along the right-of-way, but they only stop at stations that have concurrent or rational riders to pick up. So they're basically express.
That is what we're doing. That is what we're doing in Boca Raton. We're doing.
Oh, good. So you're doing a dedicated right-of-way.
We're doing routes. Yeah, we're starting with one smaller route and then moving in concentric circles of routes. And then in terms of the actual the stations, to your point, the data will start to gather as to the best location for the stations, with some, obviously we have some ideas in mind just based on current just current usage, but then that the data will eventually help us build the right stations to have fixed base routes that will then become larger autonomous routes on a fixed system. But that is the system that's been
told
to us that we should. That's the system that's been portrayed to us by the vendor, that's the way we should be getting this out as a pilot program.
Yeah. But that solves a massive number of problems. Quite frankly, if you contain the flow, you can do all sorts of wonderful things like platooning and signal prioritization.
Talk about that, platooning, yeah.
And also, you can solve, to a certain degree, a lot of the human anxiety level, because in a dedicated zone, you can have work staff who can move to any abnormal condition very quickly. So what I object to is the idea that, and this is what most of my clients and everybody talks about, is that these are free floating, and somebody's out in the middle of nowhere and they need a van to downtown, and they call for it and they get it. And that, so question then, your vans will stay on the right. You don't have a right of way necessarily, and I can understand that you start before you need a right of way, and then as the system grows in intensity and utilization, you'll need to add a dedicated right of way to really get all the benefits. Because don't forget, unless you can propose to people that they're going to get from A to B faster, not just cheaper but faster, ridership is not going to be very robust. We all know that.
But Peter, you've raised a great point, and I'm really glad to hear Mark say, yeah, that's really what we're doing. But the question of affordability when you in next to those stations is still a challenge. How do you see that being addressed?
Well, let's just back up and make sure we understand the paradigm a little better. Right now, what my shtick is. We have a lot of strip commercial. That land is undervalued. There's no question that that's where the routes should be, even though people think, I don't want to go there. But if we convert those to higher density multifamily, you have solved not only the workforce housing problem, but you've also overcome your issue, which is, it'll be expensive to be there. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a couple nuances that I haven't seen anybody do really serious analysis on, which is last quarter mile. So if you have a dedicated route and stations, can you allow the vehicles to go a quarter mile off and really expand the pickup zone? Without really hitting the detriment of massive deadhead, kind of displacement and repositioning. I think that one of the issues thought you were going to say expenses in terms of vehicle cost per vehicle mile. And of course, if you're doubling the vehicle miles, it would take a lot of savings to overcome that change, even in terms of drivers. Anyway, so I'm interested in, somebody sometime doing some serious analysis of peak hour events. I mean, how many vehicles do you need to put on the road at what time of day, and where are your storage facilities, and how does that all work? And can you take this basic idea of substituting autonomous vans for BRT, which is kind of a very simple proposition, you can see it clearly, to something that allows a certain amount of off route trip, so that instead of a quarter mile band, you've got a half mile band of people that are within walking distance, that kind of thing.
So many questions, lots of good things. Well, I'm glad we have folks like Jun who are pretty well prepared to absolutely work on those kinds of research questions.
So very first thing, I don't agree on the part that increase VMT only also for shuttles, because VMT, if we calculate on the per capita level, shuttles do not really significantly increase the VMT. The robotaxi increase it because they were roaming on the street to find the next passenger, or instead of parking there like a human driver would do. And also the 30% you will see in private ownership, I think 30% might be an underestimate, because another usage scenario for private autonomous vehicles we see in the future, one thing is the car sharing, like Zipcar. So instead of like parking there while you're working, your vehicle can go outside and pick up passengers on its own. I think 30% increase on the VMT for a privately owned AV might be an underestimate if that's the case, like more people up to that one. So for the later questions, there are so many of them, can't really remember all of it.
Well, but just new research to do that. I think there's lots of research opportunities. And I just also, David Edwards just withdrew his request. We have a couple questions on Slido. One is just a question: what is the life cycle of new autonomous EVs like? Do they last longer than standard buses and cars? Can the parts be recycled? We know there's a lot of questions about batteries with all of these vehicles.
Pretty hard.
Pretty hard. So we know that the buses have a short lifespan. Mark was telling us about all the parts and everything. So we're still in the same boat with the electrics.
Yeah.
We also, Elon Jha has, one of my current PhD students, has asked if there is existing research comparing the different sizes of shared AVs, the 5 per passenger versus the 20 passenger versus really then even the full size bus, and comparison on those. I mean, it's in relation to some of those, you know, I mean, Peter, when you're imagining slightly, these slightly more, allowing a shuttle to get off route a quarter mile or a half mile, are you just, you're assuming, I assume, fairly small you know, having a fleet of a lot of small vehicles?
You know, yes, because they can platoon. There's no reason for large buses, you know, bus scale ART or autonomous vehicles, because they can platoon. They become like one vehicle effectively. They can run about 2 feet apart. So I think it's better. And also in terms of people's sense of security, getting on a big bus with no driver, no security, that's a more, you know, challenging aspect than getting into a small vehicle. So, and I think the drivetrain efficiency is about the same. So no, I don't see the need for larger. Now on major routes, I would think 10 person vans would be good. Okay. For peak hour. I mean, the reason I asked about peak hours, in the end, you have to design a system around peak hour. You can't design it around the normative hour. So, you know, for that, I think 10 person vehicles, but they can still platoon and, you know, have tremendous efficiencies.
Yeah, I think our vehicles, I believe, are 6 to 8 passenger. You know, they got a couple of pull down seats. I think the stopping distance, I think the vehicular weight and the stopping distance and the turning radius were all other features that I guess that the owners told me that was kind of more favorable in terms of the traditional vehicular size, in terms of maneuverability and stopping distance to increase safety and, you know, and those kinds of things. Yeah, to Peter's point about platooning, yeah, it's something we talked about. Imagine if, let's say there are traditionally in the routes that we have designed, if we have 10 AVs, you know, roaming around doing their route. But let's say we have a concert at our amphitheater, right? So all of a sudden, you know, you have a mass amount of people that are all in one place that you know you need to get them out of that core. You could then platoon, in theory, have the AVs waiting there for the concert to end, and then get people out of the center core during those events, right? So during those kind of, during those one-off events, they can do specialized service. They can handle the population flow of the specialized event, and then they can kind of, after the event's over, they can kind of just get back to business.
You know, the software capacity of these systems would be extraordinary. You could program it, you know, for 2 months out for special events.
Right.
And, you know, it would be right there, right then. And, you know, and then it would be programmed for peak hour, it would be programmed for off hours, so that there's, you know, the other beauty about these systems, of course, is it's 24/7. You're no longer stranded at the end of a transit trip with no way home, which, you know, is always a limitation. And then, of course, you know, 24/7 operation of drivers is a, you know, extraordinary expense. So there's so many reasons to figure out how to make this work. I'm just looking for both the technology and the software and the right of ways. I do think your path of saying, no, we have definite right-of-ways is really the key to this whole equation.
I still want to I still am curious to speculate, though, on the question of how on-demand could evolve and whether those algorithms will be able to reduce the amount of deadhead. If you really assume that your whole city becomes car light, everybody, and that suddenly it's feasible to service folks in traditional single-family home neighborhoods. I want to imagine and speculate on that as a future possibility. I'm not willing to quite completely assume everybody has to be.
See this?
I think it's possible. I think, like in municipal operations, we have fire stations in zones, and our police are patrolling zones. And I think you could have AVs kind of in, kind of have their zone, where they, and obviously the data will eventually support where the zones, the boundaries of the zones and the timing of how long they have to, the wait time and all those things. I do believe that it could get there in the future, where there will be, they'll have their zones of how, and you'll know how many units you need per zone. So it could potentially get there.
Yeah, Ellen, I've always conceived that you would have feeder shuttles that take you to the trunk line. I mean, that's pretty normative, and there's a reason old-fashioned transit evolved in a certain way, which is you have trunk lines and then you have feeder lines. If you try to mush those together and say any vehicle can go anywhere because somebody needs a trip, then you get into that kind of sprawl of capacity.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. I think we should come to a close. I do really want to, there's so many more topics we could talk about. And I'd like to actually ask all three of you just a little sort of speculation on, what advice do you have for other cities as they begin to look at the options of, what different forms of autonomy. And I think Peter, you've made it very clear what you think we need is autonomous versions of BRT. But the robotaxis right now and the Teslas certainly seem to be winning that battle. How do cities shift it? We just need a lot more public investment. We need, how do we shift it to give AV shuttles more runway? June.
I'd say act fast. Act fast, put that AV shuttle in place before the robotaxi arrive in your town. So the first mobility people are going to experience will be the shuttle service instead of the robotaxi, to be honest. Don't wait for too long.
Peter?
I think that's exactly right. We finally need a case study that other cities can emulate. Mark, I'm glad you guys are well on your way there. That sounds unbelievably exciting. It's why I signed on, as I wanted to see if something was finally happening here. Robotaxis are not a big win. I mean, they function pretty well in high-density cities. We don't have very many of those. And even in that context, they're creating a lot of problems in terms of congestion and curb space. So, and I haven't seen any. Jun, you remarked that maybe my data is old on the VMT issue, deadheads, but even in a place like San Francisco, I think the robotaxi deadhead's very, very high. And I don't see how, if you had at-large vans going anywhere and to connect, origins and destinations of whatever somebody needs, is going to be much different in terms of VMT performance.
Mark, last word.
I think, again, you've got to plan it. I like Jun's slide, where she talks about the potential planning around it. And the question is, can cities, acknowledging that this will be an acceptable form, And to Peter's point, to bring it together, to have dedicated routes, right? Like we have a shared use trail in Boca Raton called the El Rio Trail, right? No true cars are allowed on this. But, it is 12 to 14 feet wide. Could that be a dedicated AV line that will have be just autonomous vehicles that links the big links, right? It links our one rail system, the tri-rail, to our other rail system, the Bright Line. It shows a tremendous opportunity. So I would say, if you could plan the infrastructure in mind, right, and then embed that into your zoning codes, into your building codes. Why? Because then the building, to Peter's point, the shopping center or building that is on the periphery of such a trunk line can then start to design, a transit hub or a transit hub spot or a station if the parcel of lot, if the plat is big enough, then they could start designing around it, and then to incentivize, the private investment community to participate in that. Obviously, hey, listen, if you can do those things, well, you should get a little zoning, a little density bonus. Why? Because you're alleviating the traffic problem that normally is associated with sprawl. So again, I think it's going to take many stakeholders coming together at literally at every level. But starting with literally the comprehensive plans of cities starting to acknowledge that this is a form, an acceptable and will be a kind of future-based form of transportation.
Great note to end on. And I just really do want to especially thank you, Mark. I mean, as a council member, we need more folks in public service who understand these issues and advocate for them. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for your leadership on this topic, your service to Boca Raton. Thank you, Jun, or I really should say, Dr. Wang. I hope you will study the impacts of the shuttle in Boca Raton over the next few years, and maybe talk to Peter about how to get a little more research done on the ideas of allowing flexibility or not. And thank you, Peter, for joining us as a surprise guest. Really, really terrific. Thank you, all of the attendees. You've been listening to episode 47 of Redesigning Cities, the Speedwell Foundation Talks at Georgia Tech.